All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Alyssa Muller, and I'm the director of the Mastery-Based Learning Collaborative at the State Board of Education. And I'm here today facilitating the session with Linda Drake, our Director of Career and College Readiness Initiatives. As is our practice, we start the meeting by acknowledging that this meeting joins and works with Native American communities on the traditional lands of the 29 federally recognized tribes and numerous other Native American tribes that have not received federal recognition. We acknowledge that peoples native to this land have not been well served by our educational system, and we ask that you join us in our commitment to recognizing the important history of Native peoples in our state and in honoring Washington's tribes as one step towards dismantling the colonialism present in our education system. I am joining you today from the traditional lands of the Nisqually and Coast Salish peoples, and there's a resource on screen to discover which traditional tribal lands your home and work occupies in case you don't already know. So today we are here to talk about aligning graduation requirements to the Washington profile of a graduate. I will note that if other topics get brought up, we may need to redirect some comments because there are a lot of other organizations and work groups doing work in related areas in our state right now. It's great to see some familiar faces of folks who joined us last week, but I would note if you joined us last week and shared live, please defer to others today and don't repeat comments you've shared previously. You're always welcome to email us with additional comments or request a meeting to have further discussion if we run out of time today and you don't get to share everything you'd like to share. So today we're in webinar mode since we have so many participants, but we want to know who's in the room. So please share in chat your name and location, and if appropriate, your organization. We're also going to launch a poll to better understand roles of folks in the room. So please check all that apply. So I'm going to give folks just a few more seconds to answer that poll. I did want to share just a quick overview of our time together. We're going to, in just a moment, move on to doing some quick word cloud exercises to get started. Then Linda and I will give an overview presentation to inform our discussion. And then we're going to do one more exercise, and then the rest of our time today will be spent around discussing some guiding questions where folks will be able to unmute, and the host will invite you to turn on your video by joining as a panelist to share your thoughts once we get to the discussion segment. Thank you to those of you who joined and responded to the poll. I'm not surprised that we don't have any current students because we're having a webinar in a couple of weeks that's focused on hearing from students. So just FYI, adults are welcome to join that student webinar, but they won't be able to speak. So we're excited for that one. All right. Let's see. So first of all, we wanted to hear from you based on either your students' recent experience. What 3 words would you use to describe current graduation requirements? So you can follow the instructions on the screen. If you're using your phone, you can hold it up to that QR code to respond, or you can go to the website and enter your 3 words. Just in case you're not really familiar with state graduation requirements, think about the current learning experiences your students have had in high school and describe those in several words. And you can respond in chat if you'd like to, but if possible, respond on the word cloud so we can get sort of a sense of what are the most common words that we're hearing about current graduation requirements. All right, so it looks like folks have entered confusing a lot, complicated, challenging. And no worries to those of you who don't have a way to access the word cloud. We'll look at your comments in chat too. We just wanted to sort of get as comprehensive of a picture as we could through the word cloud. All right, overwhelming, compliance. All right. So this is why the state board has been tasked with reviewing graduation requirements and creating recommendations to align them to the profile. So we have some work to do, we know that. Next, I think we've given folks some time. We're gonna switch to a little bit different of a prompt. This one is based on the state board's recommendations. What do you hope for graduation requirements in the future? So how do you want to be able to describe graduation requirements in the future? Flexible, adaptive. These are some great words, y'all. Keep going. Relevant. We hear that a lot. That was one of our most common words from our last listening session to this prompt. Relevant to students' lives. Mastery focused. Love that. Competency based. Yeah, similar. Okay. All right, I'm gonna give folks just a couple last seconds to finish responding if you haven't already, and then we will go ahead and move on. But this has been really helpful. Thank you for that. All right. Okay, Linda, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. And we just wanted to give you a quick background on the graduation requirements because we felt it was relevant to the alignment work and what we're asking you to reflect on today. So the state board was asked to review the purpose of the high school diplomas back starting in 2005, 2006. They started working on a 24 credit diploma. And the reasons that they wanted to look at it, because at the time, graduation requirements didn't align very well with the minimum college admission standards. So there was a disconnect in the understanding that students and parents had that when they graduated from college, they actually might not have taken the courses that prepared them to enter directly into a four-year college. Most seniors did not take a full load of school at the time as well. And about half of entering two-year college students were taking below college level math or ELA. That has changed. So it is possible that the graduation requirements has impacted that level of preparedness for college. So we have seen some improvement there as well. Also, graduation requirements at the time were significantly lower than in other states. So there was a concern about competition. Our students being competitive with students in other states. Next slide. So in 2014, the legislature approved 24 credit graduation requirements. There was some increase in funds to support those requirements. In 2019, the legislature replaced the assessment requirement with graduation pathway options. And then in 2021, the legislature directed the development of the Washington profile of a graduate, which Alyssa is going to describe.
So Washington has really been on a journey to increase capacity for mastery-based learning in our system. Mastery-based learning allows students to demonstrate their learning in different ways and embodies many of the other aspects of good teaching that's outside of the scope for our discussion today. But Stephanie will pop a link in chat in case you're learning more about mastery-based learning. The state's mastery-based learning was charged to develop a profile of a graduate, describing the cross-disciplinary skills the student needs to develop by the time they graduate from high school. And the profile is a way of really allowing our educators to focus on all of the important skills in the classroom we want our students to learn beyond just the academic content, like critical thinking and problem solving and financial and digital literacy. So the profile will really set the vision for what we require of students, regardless of how we deliver instruction in a more traditional school or in a school that has implemented mastery-based learning. The profile is also a way to redefine more holistic graduation requirements based on what students need to know and be able to do for future success. So the state's mastery-based learning work group really believes that Washington has an imperative to shift the focus of our education system from an industrial model that sorts students to one that intentionally supports every student in developing the dynamic range of skills we want to see in every graduate of our K-12 system. We can do that through the profile they've developed. This first slide shows only the larger categories of skills and attributes and how these align with the current laws around the goals for basic education and the purpose of a high school diploma. So these laws already guide what students should know and be able to do by the time they graduate. But the work group hopes that the profile will really sort of bring these laws to life and help communities understand all of the ways our education system develops our students as whole people beyond just their academic knowledge. So this slide shows the larger categories as well as how the work group has grouped the subcategories of skills. I want to acknowledge that the development of these profile skills is really a lifelong process. So the K-12 system focus is to support students in developing age-appropriate foundational skills that prepare them for their next steps in life. Once fully implemented, we would expect all Washington students to be developing these skills throughout their K-12 education, and that high school graduates would have the ability to draw upon each of these interconnected skills at the appropriate time. So in the same bill that charged the work group to develop the profile, the legislature charged the State Board of Education with doing a holistic examination of our graduation requirements and authorized the State Board to submit recommendations to the legislature to align graduation requirements with the profile of a graduate by this December. So in developing these recommendations, the State Board is required to consider the relationship between credits and core subject area requirements, potential changes to the requirements, and how the components of the diploma can better work together as a system. Linda.
Okay, so I think we want to kind of zoom through the next slides. We wanted to give you a really basic review of what the current graduation requirements are, but we also want to leave plenty of time to hear from you. So this is a lot, but we're going to zoom through it. There is a statutory purpose of the high school diploma, and our diploma has three parts: the high school and beyond plan, credit and subject area requirements, and graduation pathway options. Next slide. These are the credit and subject area requirements. The credits, they're shown there in yellow, are the core requirements, and then there are 7 flexible credits as well. Local school districts can add additional requirements for local graduation requirements as well. Next slide. This shows the college academic distribution requirements, or CADRs. There is some pretty good alignment now with our graduation requirements. Next slide. And then, of course, graduation pathway options, the newest graduation requirement that replaced the previous system of assessments. Next slide. And then the high school and beyond plan, which is a planning tool where students work with educators and their family to decide what courses to take and to plan for what they want to do after high school. Next slide. And then in addition to graduation requirements, districts also have to provide certain educational offerings. These are mostly in statute. They are other education that the legislature has identified as important for students. So districts have to provide for graduation requirements, and then in addition, some other educational offerings as well. Next slide.
Okay, so we know we breezed through that really fast, but we wanted to spend most of our time hearing from you all. So we wanted to do just one more quick exercise first to sort of jumpstart your thinking before we get into more general discussion. So you can either use the link that Jaylee will pop into chat, or again, if you're using your phone, you can just scan the little QR code. And we have two questions we're hoping you can respond to in this little Padlet. The first is, what are some of the assets of the current graduation requirements? So for example, maybe it's an asset that our graduation requirements are fairly well aligned to the college admission requirements. And then the second question is, what are some skills in the profile that are not adequately addressed in graduation requirements? So I would say what we hear most often, for instance, is that financial literacy, even though it's supposed to be available to students, it's not a graduation requirement. And so maybe that's one of the missing skills between the profile and current graduation requirements. So those are just a couple of quick examples, but we would love for you to spend just a couple minutes responding to those in the Padlet.
While folks are filling in the Padlet exercise, I think one of the challenges I would observe is that in the word cloud exercise, folks are concerned about current graduation requirements being complex. And I think we have a little bit of a push-pull between flexibility and complexity. We do want our graduation requirements to be individualizable so that it can be meaningful for each student. But sometimes when we try to do that at a policy level, it does get complex. So that's going to be a challenge as we make our recommendations for aligning.
I would also just note, as I'm sitting here scrolling through, I'm seeing some repeated responses, which is totally fine, but just a note that you can also heart other people's responses as a way of sort of like bumping them up. So if you, for instance, agree that financial literacy is a gap, you could go ahead and just click that little heart on the gaps versus typing it in again. Okay, so I'm looking at the assets, and pathways is coming up a lot. So it seems like folks are agreeing that having sort of that system of graduation pathways versus our former system of having to meet the assessment requirements is an asset. College alignment is appearing a couple times in the assets. Okay. All right, this is awesome. So y'all feel free to keep typing if you want to keep typing, but I wanted to ask, in case anyone, maybe one or two folks really wanted to speak to what they shared in either the assets or the gap, feel free to raise your hand and we'll invite you to do that before we move on to our sort of more general discussion questions. All right. Allison, you're first. Allison, we promoted you to panelist, so you should be able to turn on your video when you're ready to speak and unmute.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm a graduate from the class of 2017. And one of the positive assets that I inputted was the strong core structure in English, math, and science, and really requiring that students take those classes almost every year, or in English's case, every year. But one of the gaps that I spoke to is the limited ability to specialize, especially when it comes to studying a foreign language, or maybe if a student really wants to go far in band or sports medicine. It's often very difficult for students to do what people in my year were able to do. My younger sister is a senior right now, and for her to have done the same number of Spanish classes that I was able to do would have required 0-hour classes for many of her semesters, which is something that can be a real difficulty on kids, and wasn't something that she judged would work during COVID with the other class schedules. So I think those are two things that need to find a balance.
Thanks, Allison. Very insightful. Roy, you had your hand raised.
Yes, thank you. I'm looking at things through the alternative schools eyes, and the graduation pathways have some significant gaps for us. If you look at it, well, for one, alternative schools can't do CTE classes by the State Board of Education. So that pathway is gone. And for many of our students, that would be a real usable pathway. And then when you look at, if they can't pass the smarter balance, many times they can't pass some of the other ones. And so it would be nice if there was something like the local collection of evidence that they did for that 1 year. That worked pretty good. The ASVAB, we have been able to get some of our students through that, so that has been very helpful. But I think for the alternative schools especially, a lot of the pathways just aren't going to work, like the Bridges to College class in an alternative school setting. Many times that doesn't work. Dual credit classes, things like that. So I would like to see something added that maybe was like the local collection of evidence, how that used to be, or maybe like a project based or something like that, where the students can do presentations.
Thanks, Roy. We hear that a lot, and I will just take a moment to plug. We've been doing, the legislature charged us to do some research around the graduation pathways and if any of them needed to change or if we needed to add additional pathways. So we'll be releasing shortly a survey specifically about the pathways and focus group opportunities. So if folks are interested in participating and giving, really specific feedback about pathways, let us know in the chat, and we would love to continue to hear, especially from our alternative schools and like our small rural schools we know struggle with the pathways as well.
Thank you.
I would also mention that there was State Board of Education request legislation from 2 years ago that was carried over this year that would have provided a performance exhibition pathway, which would be somewhat similar to a portfolio. But unfortunately, that did not move. But I suspect we'll have some sort of recommendation about an additional pathway in the future at some point as well.
All right, let's see. Nicholas, I believe we promoted you to panelist and you're up next.
I'm seeing my video pop up. Can you thumbs up if you can hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, excellent. I'm just here to advocate for a certificate of completion like many states have for students who are intellectually disabled. The pathways for those kids who are typically taking life skills classes till 21 or after 18 at least, typically the CTE pathway is where we typically try to find a graduation pathway for them, and it's at times a detriment to both the student and the program. And when many other states have many states have a model of a certificate of completion for a very specific clinically identified group of students who have a very unique life path compared to other students in schools. The equity, the inclusive nature of the pathways for that very, very, very tiny group of kiddos is a challenge for our schools because fitting round holes in the square pegs for those kids is just not often best for outcomes later in life for them. And so that was my point of advocacy.
Mhm. Yes, we've heard that. I think the CTE pathway can be a great pathway for students, but also it's sometimes not the appropriate pathway for students. And we do want, ideally we want the pathway to align with the student's high school and beyond plan so that it works well with what the student wants to do after high school.
All right, Wes, I believe you are up next.
Thank you. I wanted to comment on partially what Royce said. I would encourage him to look into the Skill Center if he has one in his area, because that's a way to meet the graduation pathway and CTE. And being that 14 of my 44 schools assigned to me are alternative high schools, we have great successful alternative ed students. So that is an awesome opportunity. And then I appreciate that the legislature tried to look at more pathways to be able to meet that need. But being a former teacher in the state of Oregon, when we used to have SIM and CAM, which is that collection of evidence piece that we were talking about, we need to be careful what we're looking at, because if you want to talk to anybody that was an Oregon educator during that time, it created more problems than solutions having that. So I agree. I want more options for students, but we have to be careful about the options being more of a burden for our students and our staff.
Thanks, Wes. Ping, I believe you're up next.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak. I would like to just bring the point to your attention that many students who graduate from the high school, when they review back, they think that either they're from minority, like students of color background, or white. They're not students of color. They're just white students. After they learn some ethnic groups relations in the college, because I teach at the community college in Spokane. So the students take class with me on race and ethnic relations, and they were introduced about those the hidden history of African American or Africans' contribution to the civilization that African people invented many things, but the credit was given to the Western European people. And when they know more about a little bit more about Asian American history in the United States, or Pacific Islanders, how they were treated, they kind of feel they're opened eyes, because these were never taught in the high school, in the K-12. And so really, I just wanted to say the ethnic study, like your department, State Board of Education, that you created a modern racism in the education, that conference of students in maybe 2020 or 2019, you made that. Yeah, I showed that to my students, and many students changed their mind after they watched that 90 minutes documentary. Very touching to hear. They say, wow, we wish this will be taught to us much earlier, not just now. And so they are more, they really feel like they know more, and so that could decrease their assumptions or stereotypes about the minoritized groups. And so it's a mirror and window thing. I really totally embrace that that philosophy. The ethnic study is a mirror and window to let students see themselves and see each other, so they could be more understanding, more accepting each other, respecting each other, and our world will become much better from if we do this in our education starting earlier. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ping. Yeah, Ping's referring to, we had a student board member who had a panel about racism in the classroom, and that really sort of prompted the board to begin exploring how we might add an ethnic studies requirement. So that's something that's been prompted by students that the board has been really focused on and wants to include as part of this work. All right, Adrian, I think you're up next.
Thank you. I am speaking as a parent of a middle school student who's going to be rising up to high school. I'm speaking as a member of a religious minority. I am very concerned about the kind of ethnic studies that Washington State may be implementing. I have no difficulty, and in fact, I support people learning about each other's cultures, values, religions, multiple perspectives, the sense of being a global citizen as well as being a citizen or engaged in citizenship in the United States. Any kind of ethnic studies, though, needs to fall into what's loosely called constructive ethnic studies. So it's based in multiple perspectives. It's non-ideological. It uses evidence-based reasoning. It stresses critical thinking. When I go up to the OSPI website, unfortunately, what I'm seeing is something that often falls under the criteria of critical ethnic studies or liberation-oriented ethnic studies. And that is very much within one perspective, a left perspective. Often, not always, there's large overlays with anti-Semitism and other forms of oppression that just are not getting looked at critically. I think that this is going to be a very sensitive issue for Washington State parents. My sense is that there are a lot of parents who are feeling excluded or feeling that their values are not represented in some of these new curriculum changes, including ethnic studies. So I think we need to be very careful about whether we're talking about constructive ethnic studies and implementing that, or using the critical ethnic studies model. I'd also like to say that any kind of ethnic studies curriculum, it needs to reinforce and build core academic skills, core educational skills, the skills that schools are supposed to be building, skills in writing, skills in reading, skills in critical thinking, skills in math and science. It's that content-based education that we need to return to and return to strongly. Thank you for giving me a chance to speak.
Thanks, Adrian. To your last point, yes, I think the board is really looking at how could ethnic studies sort of be layered on to like an English language arts class as a lens or a social studies class as a lens. So absolutely. The other thing I would say, just to be really clear, is that in Washington, curriculum is a local decision. So the state sets state learning standards, but then it's up to the local districts to adopt curriculum. So the work that OSPI, that you referenced, OSPI's Ethnic Studies Advisory Committee, is sort of a framework that then districts would have to make decisions about curriculum. But appreciate your feedback. You're certainly not the only one we've heard that from. So, all right, with that, I don't see any other hands raised. So I think I might screen share again and see if we could move on to a few other discussion questions that we'd love to hear feedback on. So again, feel free to raise your hand if you want to respond to some of these, and then we'll have you join as a panelist so you can turn on your video if you'd like to. We'd love to hear folks' thoughts about how graduation requirements advance equity versus perpetuate systemic inequities. And then that second question you see on the slide, I do just want to make clear that these are just examples listed on the slide. You could also talk about how graduation requirements work for our underserved student populations, like students of color and students with disabilities and our English language learners, etc. So if folks want to, again, start raising their hand, and then we can promote you and let you to respond to any of these that you want to share feedback on. All right, Renee, I'm going to promote you to a panelist, and then you should be able to speak. Renee, go ahead when you're ready. Renee, if you're speaking, you are on mute. There we go. Okay.
I'm unmuted. I appreciated the list you shared and that it included students who wanted to attend college and competitive colleges, excuse me, students who plan to take band all 4 years, or students who are in a heavy load of APs or want to take foreign language all 4 years. For students who don't do band and don't have a curriculum requirement like expectation of their own like that, there are not a lot of opportunities for them to explore. Band is in many ways a very academic course, even though it is an arts course. And so as a parent of kids who go that direction, I see them wishing that they could explore more in a different way, in maybe a history class or a language class, or even in math or science. But those pathways are pretty set with very little options for students to take. So for those kinds of students, it would be wonderful to see opportunities for them to be able to do some of that exploration that we hope kids get to do in high school, to be able to find what direction are they going to go next.
Renee, do you know if in your district you have like additional requirements beyond the state requirements? What I'm asking is, like, do your students have 7 electives, or do they actually have less because of local requirements?
So I actually was going to go and check that. I think
No
it's
worries.
pretty close, but if you are going to a competitive college, you are
Sure.
going to take 4
Right.
years of math and 4 years of language arts and 4 years. And there's very little flexibility. And this may be more of a school issue than a state issue, but inflexibility about being able to skip over LA9 and be able to move forward and maybe get to take a world language class, wrong phrasing, world literature class instead of just the 4 that are laid out. It's
Sure.
a little bit odd. And in one way, I totally understand there are so many different needs for students, special needs students, 2E students, gifted students, and many others. And so I really understand that trying to create flexibility for everyone is not easy. It's a challenging task. And yet it is often those gifted kids who end up with the most limitation in our schools, and they're able and ready and want to learn and want to explore, and they're for 13 years told, well, not that much, not that much. So being able to allow them opportunities to personalize their learning. It used to be popular to have classes where you could, if you had taken other classes, you would be able to, your senior year or your junior year, work with a department head in order to create an individual study plan for a year. So many possibilities exist to allow even those students with the highest requirements to move on to their after high school plan, to still do more than just the core standard classes.
Yeah, that's fair. Thanks, Renee.
Thank you.
Any other folks wanting to respond to sort of the questions on screen? We could move on to another set of questions if these aren't resonating with y'all. And I want to also acknowledge I don't do a great job keeping up with chat and facilitating live. So I promise we're saving the chat comments. So staff will be going back and reflecting on those as well, but just acknowledging we're not really drawing that into the discussion we're having live. Wes, yes, sir.
Right. I guess I was wondering, when it says pursuing a CTE program, could you give a little more explanation about what that means?
I think we meant it as kind of a catch-all. I mean, some students want to go do a full, skills center program with us taking a whole series of courses and maybe even complete a CTE credential of some kind. So.
And so, I mean, I would say anything we could do to be able to make that possible for students earlier is a good thing. And I know I don't even share the same opinion with my fellow skill center directors in the state in that opinion, but it always boggles me that we have students that struggle through middle school to keep successful and stay in school, and then we get them to high school and say, hey, just hold on for 2 more years so you can go to the skill center. And if we could just, meet them where they're at in their level of success and prepare them for a post-high school that may not include college, but may, to be able to be successful would be really key. And if the state could support that rather than having that be an other group of our students would be awesome.
Thanks, Wes. Okay, well, I think I might maybe move on to some additional discussion questions just in case these are resonating more with folks. So same deal, if you want to respond, just raise your hand and we will promote you to a panelist.
I do want to note that there is a some really good comments going on in the comment section. Please feel free to join us and make your comments out loud to share with folks.
And just in case anybody's on their phone, I realized I probably should have been reading these questions out loud. So sorry about that, y'all. So just in case that's the case, the questions we have on screen right now is it the right balance of flexibility and structure for students, meaning the core and the elective credits? And then whether a student has a choice in electives varies by district due to limited offerings and or additional local requirements. Is this a concern? All right, let's see. Jebediah, I think you're up next.
Yeah, I was just looking at your graphic, and I know that one thing we're working on is how do we create things like that fit into our high school and beyond plan and fit into, if we're using Zell or other things in our, course promotion. So I think that as we look at this process, developing things that all connect together. So as we're looking at whether it be a pathway, the graduation requirements, how schools promote, getting something where kids can do it together. Because right now at our school, at least, we have, you're doing your high school and beyond plan, you're in Zello, then you're doing registration, and I'm going somewhere else, and none of it really looks the same or flows. So it's a lot of disjointed effort and a lot of work on the students to try to connect this that looks this. And I think your graphic there, with the credits, everything looks good. So I think, developing maybe even some standardized resources or something that schools can plug into that helps those students, whether it not be the pathway route that they're going to go to graduation, whether, like talking about they go to skill center, but how do we plug in the skill center into graphics like that and do things that way? So I think that's a lot of us that are directors and other people here at this meeting, counselors that have questions on it. I can't imagine our, students and families, especially as we talk about the, ethnicity and other things, our students, their families have just moved into the States or into the country or different things, how they make sense of it. So I think kind of getting that student voice would be good in their lens and how they see things. So thank you.
Thank you. Nicholas, you wanted to jump back in?
I was just going to say, I think the credits are, I think there's options. I think there's plenty of elective options. I've worked in 20,000 school districts, 10,000 school districts. And for them, there was always a diverse offering of electives. I think as some panelists had mentioned, I now work in a district of about 550 kids. And the challenge of providing a diverse offering of electives. And that's less about your standards and more about the prototypical school model and the structure of high school. But I think, and if they're, not necessarily your world, but it impacts us, but it has more to do about other agencies and how the funding and the certificates of teachers as well. not that, but just that we now look for people with multiple certificates, just trying to find the opportunities for electives. But I do think within the 24 credits, 7 electives is a robust offering, and that experience with CTE can lead kids to take more CTE for electives if they might not have taken in the past. And so I think as far as the structure goes, other than the limitations for small schools that aren't necessarily your doing, and then I know CTE can help that a lot, but yeah, I think it's a great setup.
Thanks, Nicholas. Yeah, I know our education system is complicated, right? It's not just the graduation requirements, it's the prototypical funding and all of that. So I appreciate you bringing that into the discussion as well. Let's see, Sandy, I think you're up next. Sandy, if you're speaking, you're still muted.
There we go. Found the mute button. I'm going to go back to the equity question that I heard you ask quite a bit ago. I've had 3 kids graduate from Washington State Public Schools in the last decade. I have been highly, highly involved with education for about 15 years now. All 3 of my kids had different graduation requirements from each other. And all 3 of them had different graduation requirements when they graduated than when they started high school. This is a horrible situation for families that are not familiar with our education system, even families that are, but don't have significant hours to invest in following the ever-changing graduation requirements. So I would just ask that you make a commitment that when a class starts at the beginning of their 9th grade year, you will not change their graduation requirements before their graduation date.
Linda, do you want to respond to that?
Well, yeah, I would say that it is the State Board of Education's policy to do that. On occasion, we will, and particularly when directed by the legislature, we will remove a requirement, but generally speaking, the State Board does not increase requirements while a student is still in high school. Sometimes the legislature does, though.
Oh, I'm, yes, profoundly aware of that. But I think the more we can communicate that at every level, it will help the legislature to maybe pause when they get excited about adding or changing something. It's so damaging to our students, again, particularly students that come from families that don't speak English. You asked about equity, and it's a huge equity issue when they cannot track what their student's graduation requirement is.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sandy. Appreciate that. Okay, Kevin, I believe you're up next.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to go back to the credits and what I see I'm in a small district, and what I see is the 24 credits provides a limitation on how we address things, because if, for example, especially coming out of COVID, where we had students not do well with online or virtual learning, that they fell behind. So now we're spending the elective credits time in the day to catch them up on their credits, or we're looking for innovative ways to get them through possibly online programs such like Edgenuity to regather those credits, or asking them to come back in the summer to catch up those credits, et cetera, because we're chasing 24. And I should say that I'm in a 6-period day school, so we only offer 24 as opposed to a trimester or a block schedule. So the question of what I thought when we looked at this is the State Board looking at the mastery level, where students who can demonstrate mastery and move on instead of just seat time, and I know we don't have seat time, but instead of just getting credits, piling up credits of certain things. But if a student can demonstrate mastery, and then we're creative in, gee, if I take a CTE course that's in construction, and I'm demonstrating the mastery of using the algebraic concepts or geometric concepts in that program, and I can demonstrate mastery for math and CT type quality and job related skills. I think if we're looking at stuff like that, that may help us do better real life skills for our students and get them a better qualified graduation. Thank you.
Yeah, Kevin, I couldn't agree more. Most of my focus is on mastery-based learning. So I'm happy to chat with you anytime about how to sort of do what you're talking about, right? Award students mastery. If a student can show mastery, then awarding them a credit for that, because there's some policies around how to do that. But yeah, you're exactly right. If we can sort of bring in more mastery-based crediting, that helps with some of our 24 credit issues as well. All right, let's see. So I'm not seeing any other folks' hands raised right now. And I know the chat discussion is going on. And like I said, I'm not very good at multitasking and facilitating and doing the chat. So I would invite, again, as Linda said, folks that are wanting to unmute and maybe share some of the comments you have in the chat. If you'd like to, feel free to do that. Or if you want to share things that aren't something we asked, right? You don't have to just respond to the discussion questions either. If you just have some thoughts that you're wanting to share about graduation requirements right now.
Right, we appreciate both the spoken comments and the written comments. And if you want to write us with comments by email, that is fine too, if you have more to say.
Ryan, did I miss your hand raise? One of my colleagues might have promoted you and I missed the hand, so sorry about that.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I did get promoted, but you can demote me if you want. So just to add into the credits, I actually think that the as far as the balance of credits, it's pretty good. I saw a lot in oh my goodness, the Padlet about financial literacy, which we actually have locally determined as a graduation credit requirement. Works really well. It does create some limitations, of course, but it's a course that we offer within CTE and works really well within our system. And then I would also, when we're looking at, oh my gosh, what was the other thing I was thinking about? Yeah, it's gone. I'll drop it in the chat. There was one other thing I was going to say. Anyway.
No worries. Can I ask, just because I'm curious,
Sure.
So you do financial literacy as a CTE credit. Does it get, do you have any CTE equivalency? So they get maybe CTE and math, or how do y'all do that?
We do have equivalencies. And I remember the other thing. I'm glad you asked the question because I remember the thing. So we do have equivalency credits as well, a lot in our computer science courses for the third year math, that substitution. And then we have some Core Plus programs that offer equivalencies in math and ELA. So we push that as much as we can. A lot of our ag classes have science equivalencies.
Sure.
So we push that wherever we can. As far as like mastery based credit, we have a local policy. And so it's not widely used yet. We're still working out internally our systems, but we do have the ability to issue credit for students. If they go out to an internship and are working towards, let's say they're working at a mechanic shop and they're working towards their ASE certification or something like that. We have staff that will work out where's the math and science credit and look at applying mastery-based credit to that. So I would agree that mastery-based credit is a huge game changer for a lot of our kids.
What district are you in, Ryan?
We're in Richland.
Richland. Okay, awesome. Thank you. Appreciate all of that.
Thank you.
All right, y'all. So I know we're getting close to our time. So I do just want to quickly mention some other ways you can give feedback. And then we do still have time for one or two other comments if folks want to raise their hands to speak. So I just wanted to note, oh, and forgive us, we didn't take off this date from our last PowerPoint. So ignore this. This is here today. You all are here. Thank you very much. So as I mentioned before, we have a student session coming up, and then we're planning to have some future listening sessions later this year when we get a little further down in the process, as well as an upcoming survey. But again, please feel free to come to board meetings. They're public meetings. You're more than welcome to give public comment either live or via email for those. We're happy to come talk. For those of you who are representing school districts or community-based organizations or whatever the case might be, if you want to invite us to any of your meetings to hear from your community directly, we would love that. We're happy to do that. And then just generally, if you didn't get a chance to share everything that you wanted to today, then please feel free to reach out to us over email and share the rest of your thoughts. We would love that as well.
And I also would add that if you have questions about graduation requirements, I'm happy to be the contact for that as well.
Exactly. So we did have one other question in case folks want to respond in the last couple of minutes we have around how would we ensure that all profile of graduate skills are addressed. This is sort of intentionally open-ended, but just any thoughts you have around how do we better incorporate all of these skills into our graduation requirements so students are really having a chance to build these throughout high school and even K-12. We would love to hear that as well in our last couple of minutes. All right, I'm not seeing any other hands. So thank you all very much for being here today. We're excited to go back and sort of dig into the chat and see all of the brilliant ideas you put in there as well. And please do reach out if you have additional questions, thoughts, concerns. We're happy to chat anytime. So thank you all very much. We appreciate your time today.